heard my son's voice before I even stepped into the hallway. His tone was low, tight, the kind a man uses when he doesn't want the walls to hear him. I stopped near the corner, holding the railing with one hand to steady my knee, and his words cut through the quiet of the house like a blade. "He'll agree if we pressure him enough." My breath slowed, and the air in my chest felt heavier than before. I didn't move. Something about the way he said it told me the danger wasn't far away. His wife answered him right away, her voice sharper than his. "We don't have time to wait. We need his signature before the deadline closes." She sounded impatient, almost annoyed, like whatever they were planning demanded quick obedience. I leaned my shoulder against the wall and tried to steady my pulse. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the sentence replayed in my mind with a cold certainty that it wasn't meant for anyone except the person they wanted to control. I stayed hidden for a moment, unsure if the conversation was about me or something in their own lives. Still, the silence that followed didn't feel casual. It felt calculated, like two people checking if the coast was clear. At my age, I've learned to trust the small signals, the tone, the pauses, the things that don't quite fit. After retiring last spring and settling into a quieter life, after losing my wife, I'd grown used to stillness. But this wasn't stillness. This felt like the start of something shifting underneath my feet. I stepped forward, letting the floor creak just enough to announce my presence. The sound snapped them into place. My son looked over his shoulder with a smile that came too fast, and his wife straightened her posture like someone fixing their expression for a photograph. "Dad, hey," he said lightly, as if they'd been discussing grocery lists or weekend plans. Their eyes tracked me too carefully, both waiting for whatever reaction they expected. I gave a simple nod and walked toward the kitchen, my feet moving at the same rhythm as always, but my thoughts tightening like a rope. I didn't ask what they were talking about, and they didn't offer anything. The room felt crowded, even though none of us touched. Their silence now was louder than the whisper I'd heard minutes earlier. As I reached the counter, my phone buzzed inside my pocket. It wasn't a message from family or a harmless reminder. It was an email from HR at the company I'd spent 35 years with. The subject line read, "Important. Action required regarding prior documentation." I hadn't expected anything from them. My retirement paperwork had been settled months ago, and their side of things had been closed. I opened the message just long enough to see the first line. "We identified something in your file that needs your review." My thumb hovered over the screen before I locked it again. I didn't want either of them to see the notification, not while they stood only a few feet away, pretending nothing was happening. Two different kinds of tension pressed against me. One inside this house, carried in whispers and cautious smiles, and another from the outside, coming from a place that had no reason to contact me anymore. I didn't know which direction the trouble would strike from first, but every instinct I had told me I needed to stay alert. Nothing about this day felt ordinary. The ground had shifted, even if no one else wanted to admit it. I sat at the kitchen table after they went upstairs, letting the quiet settle around me. My hands rested on the wood, and for a moment I felt the weight of years I didn't usually think about. When my wife passed, my son was still young enough to need rides to school and someone to check his homework at night. I learned how to cook simple meals, keep the house moving because there was no one else to do it. Those years built a kind of bond I thought would last without question. Maybe that's why the whisper I heard earlier sat so heavily in my chest now. It didn't match the boy I remembered raising. I tried not to read too much into his wife's tone downstairs, but it wasn't the first time something about her felt off. She'd always kept a polite distance, the kind that looks normal on the surface, but leaves a chill underneath. In the beginning, I assumed she was shy or unsure around me. Later, I noticed how her voice sharpened when money or paperwork came up, like those topics flipped a switch inside her. Even simple things, me declining a new phone plan they recommended, or me saying I preferred to handle my own bank errands, produced this tight, controlled look in her eyes. I brushed it aside at the time. Now I wasn't so sure. A few months back, they had nudged me to simplify certain things. My son mentioned that keeping extra accounts open made everything harder on everyone. His wife suggested combining a few bills to make it easier. Each request was small enough that refusing felt unnecessary. Yet, accepting always left me with a strange tug in my gut. Those moments weren't dangerous on their own, but looking back, they were pieces of something I didn't see forming. My retirement package had been straightforward, or at least I thought it was. 35 years with the company had earned me a pension, a savings plan, and a set of documents HR helped me organize before I left. I kept everything in a labeled folder in my desk drawer, sorted the way I liked. Contracts in one section, benefit instructions in another, receipts tucked behind the last page. It gave me a sense of order during a time when life was changing faster than I expected. But last winter, HR called with a question about a form I didn't remember signing. Nothing serious, they said. Just a routine check. I thought maybe I had rushed something during the retirement meetings. I told them I'd pull the papers out to compare. When I checked the folder later that evening, one page looked slightly out of place, almost like it had been handled more recently than the others. I didn't think much of it then. Now, that small detail tugged at me again. Not long after that call, my son asked if I could show him a few of my employment papers. He said he needed an example for a job application he was filling out. I didn't question him at the time, but tonight the memory pressed harder, raising the kind of doubt that settles deep before you realize it has grown roots. I couldn't say for sure what the whisper downstairs meant, but standing in the middle of those old thoughts, it didn't feel random anymore. It felt connected. Maybe they weren't planning something innocent after all. Maybe the pressure they talked about had nothing to do with helping me, but everything to do with controlling something I wasn't meant to question. The next morning, my son came into the living room with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stood in front of the TV like he wanted to block the world behind him. "Dad, about yesterday," he said lightly. "You probably heard us talking about a surprise party. We were trying to keep it quiet." The explanation landed strangely, like a coat that didn't fit the shape of his voice. I nodded slowly, but the whisper I'd heard carried none of the warmth a celebration should have. The contrast dug under my skin, quiet but persistent. His wife joined us with a mug in her hand. Her tone was smooth, but her eyes tracked my face with a kind of sharp curiosity. "Actually, since you're here," she said, "I was wondering, where did you put the pension papers from your retirement, the ones with the breakdown of benefits?" There was no reason for her to need that information, and she didn't even pretend to hide the interest. I asked her why she needed them, and she stepped around the question with a casual shrug that felt anything but casual. "Just helping organize things for you," she said. "You know, making sure everything's in order." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I checked my phone out of habit, and a new email pushed itself to the top of the screen. "HR again. Please confirm the attached signature for our record." My stomach tightened. The timing was too perfect, too coordinated, like everything was brushing against the same quiet thread. I opened the document while keeping my expression still. The signature next to my printed name looked close enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention, but there was something off about the curve of the H. Mine always slanted left slightly. This one didn't. My thumb hovered over the screen, tracing the difference that only a person who had signed that name thousands of times would notice. I locked the phone before either of them stepped closer. My son leaned forward with a brightness that felt forced. "It's probably just standard stuff," he said. "Those systems glitch all the time. Just click confirm so it stops bothering you." His voice had that same push I'd heard in the hallway, the gentle pressure wrapped in concern, the tone that wants compliance disguised as advice. He made it sound easy, harmless, but the insistence didn't match the explanation he gave earlier about a party. Everything about his behavior tugged in opposite directions. They said they cared. They said they were helping. But every word today pressed instead of guided, nudged instead of supported. Care didn't feel like this. Pressure had a different temperature. When they finally walked out to run some errands, I went to my desk and pulled open the drawer. I took out the retirement folder and set it on the surface carefully, like I was afraid to disturb anything inside. I flipped through the pages, comparing each one to the digital version on my phone. Then I opened the old photo album I kept beneath the desk, the one where my wife had saved scanned copies of my signatures from years back when we refinanced the house. I held the printed signature against the altered one on the screen and let the truth settle in quietly. Something wasn't matching, not in the ink, not in the explanations, not in their voices. Whatever yesterday's whisper meant, it wasn't about a party, and I wasn't imagining the shift anymore. It was there, clear and cold, waiting for me to follow it. I waited until the house settled into its usual late morning rhythm before taking any steps. The sunlight came through the blinds in thin lines, giving me enough privacy to make a call without drawing attention. I sat at the edge of my bed, opened my contacts, and found the one name I trusted from my old HR department. I hadn't spoken to him since my retirement lunch, but I knew he'd pick up if he recognized the number. When he answered, I kept my voice low and steady, asking if he had a moment for something sensitive. He didn't sound surprised, just cautious. I told him I'd received a few emails requesting confirmation of a signature from months ago. There was a short pause before he said they had noticed changes in my retirement instructions, but held off contacting me until they completed internal checks. It didn't match your usual pattern, he said. We wanted to be sure before raising anything. His careful tone told me this wasn't a minor oversight. Something had moved inside my file without my knowledge, and they were trying to trace when it began. I asked, as calmly as I could manage, if they could see who accessed those documents. He hesitated, then added that there had been a request tied to a family-linked verification. He didn't name anyone. He didn't need to. The implication stood on its own, heavy and cold. Someone close to me had been inside paperwork that should have been untouched. I thanked him and ended the call before the quiet strain in my voice gave anything away. Downstairs, I opened my laptop and checked the home Wi-Fi logs. It wasn't something I usually looked at, but years of habit made me careful with technology. The timestamps lined up in a way that didn't make sense. My email had been accessed at hours when I was asleep, and the device ID doing it matched my son's tablet. There was no reason for him to be inside my inbox, no reason at all. I stared at the logs for a long moment, letting the information settle, then closed the laptop before the door creaked behind me. My son appeared with a burst of cheerfulness, offering to help with chores I hadn't mentioned. He wiped counters, rearranged dishes, and even asked if I needed anything from the store. It was the kind of behavior he showed only when he wanted something or felt guilty about something. The switch was too sudden to ignore. I watched him move around the kitchen with a careful calm, making note of how he avoided meeting my eyes for more than a second. Later, his wife stepped into the room with that thin smile she wore when she was testing ground. She asked if I had ever finalized the home title transfer I once mentioned years back, as if it were casual conversation. Her tone was soft, but her eyes stayed sharp, waiting for a doorway into something I wasn't offering. I answered in a short sentence and let the silence close the topic. I went upstairs afterward, took out a small notebook from my nightstand, and began writing everything down. Not dramatic statements, just simple lines, dates, times, questions, small details that didn't look like much on their own, but formed a clearer picture when placed side by side. I wasn't ready for confrontation. I wasn't even ready for a conclusion. I just knew I needed the truth in front of me, written plainly, without excuses. Whatever was happening here, it was moving quietly, and if they were being careful, then I needed to be even more careful. The email arrived in the late afternoon, just as the house had settled into a quiet that felt too controlled. I opened it at the dining table, keeping the screen tilted away from the hallway. HR had attached a PDF with a short line above it. Please review this change request immediately. When I tapped the file, a document filled the screen, one I had never seen before. It was a retirement benefit change form, the kind that rerouted a portion of my monthly payout into a different account. My name sat at the bottom in a signature that looked like mine at first glance. But the more I stared at it, the clearer the truth became. The slant was wrong. The pressure was wrong. It had been forged. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not panic, but something colder. I scrolled down and read the destination account. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. Before I could think through the details, footsteps approached, and his wife appeared with her usual composed expression. She saw the form on the screen before I could lock it. Her voice came out smooth, almost practiced. Oh, that. You already agreed to that months ago, remember? The sentence landed like a shove. I set the phone face down and looked at her. I didn't respond, but the silence between us made her twitch, just slightly. She backed toward the hallway, leaving the explanation hanging in the air like a loose wire. When I walked upstairs, I went straight to my desk, the one with the drawer I always kept locked out of habit. The key wasn't in the lock. It was lying on top of the desk as if someone had placed it there to look harmless. I pulled the drawer open, and the position of the folders told me everything. Someone had gone through them, not rummaged, not messy, carefully disturbed. The papers at the front had shifted under the weight of fingers searching for something specific. As I stood there, my son stepped into the doorway. His face was tight, and his voice carried the edge he tried to hide earlier. "Dad, you're overthinking," he said, irritation sliding through each word. Just agree. It's not a big deal. The anger in his tone didn't match the explanation of a surprise party. It matched the forged signature. It matched the Wi-Fi logs. It matched the questions about my pension. For a brief moment, I felt a sharp sting in my chest. Not fear exactly, but the quiet realization that the boy I raised had crossed into a place I had never expected him to enter. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse him. I didn't even let him see what I was thinking. I closed the drawer slowly and pocketed the key, pretending I had ended the search. He stood behind me for a few seconds more, waiting for a reaction that didn't come, then walked away, muttering something under his breath. I waited until the hallway emptied before I unlocked my phone again. The forged form, the timing, the pressure in his voice, none of it was accidental. They wanted my confirmation, not my approval. They needed me to help them legitimize what they'd already tried to take. I backed away from the desk, from the room, from the conversation they wanted me to enter. I didn't touch another document. I didn't leave anything out in the open. Whatever happened next, they wouldn't get another chance at my files. Not now, not ever. The call came just after noon, when the house was quiet enough for every ring to feel like a warning. I stepped into my room before answering and closed the door with the softest click I could manage. The HR representative spoke in a steady, measured voice, the kind used when someone is choosing words carefully. She told me their system traced multiple access logs on my retirement account, all coming from my home's IP address. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening without interrupting, my hand tightening around the phone as she read each timestamp aloud. She transferred me to the fraud prevention officer, a man whose tone carried no small talk. He explained that they had run a deeper verification check on the signature I received. The digital fingerprint embedded in the document didn't match mine. Someone attempted to execute a benefits redirection without proper authorization, he said. We need to review everything with you immediately. His voice wasn't angry, but it was firm, and each word stripped away any hope that this was a misunderstanding. He then told me what the forged request would have done. A portion of my monthly retirement income would have been frozen for a processing period, then released into the account listed on the form, an account with no connection to my name. If HR hadn't caught the inconsistencies, I would have lost access to that money indefinitely. I kept my breathing even, but inside, something settled cold and unmistakable. This wasn't guessing or suspicion anymore. This was danger with proof behind it. I thanked him quietly and told him I was available for whatever review they needed. He paused before saying they were scheduling an official fraud investigation and that I should expect formal contact within the next 24 hours. The phrase, official fraud investigation, echoed long after the call ended. It was a line I never imagined hearing in relation to my own family. When I stepped out of the room, my son and his wife were in the living room, acting like the morning had been ordinary. They asked if I wanted lunch, if I needed anything from the store, if I was feeling all right. Their voices were smooth, but every gesture felt rehearsed. I forced myself to answer normally. I couldn't let them hear the call in my tone or see it in my eyes. Not yet. The space between us had turned into something brittle, and one wrong move could shatter it too soon. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved through the house with the same routine as always. I poured water into a glass, sat in the garden for a few minutes, folded a few towels. I acted steady because I needed them to think nothing had changed. But inside, the shift was permanent. There was no going back to doubt or hesitation. HR had confirmed what I already knew in pieces. As night came in, I opened my desk drawer and removed the folder holding my important documents. I placed them in a locked bag along with my notebook and set it near the door, ready to take with me when HR called me in. My hands worked calmly, but my mind was sharp, clear in a way it hadn't been earlier in the week. I wasn't collapsing under the weight of what I'd learned. I was preparing. Whatever came next, I needed to be steady, factual, and ready to face it head on. I woke before sunrise the next morning, the house still enough that every sound felt amplified. I moved quietly, gathering the bag where I'd placed my documents, my notebook, and the copies HR had emailed. I didn't take the front door. Instead, I slipped out the side entrance and walked across the lawn toward my neighbor's house. He was an early riser, a polite man who kept to himself, and he answered the door. In a soft robe with the calm curiosity of someone who didn't expect trouble. I asked if he could hold a sealed bag for me for a couple of days. Nothing dramatic, just something I didn't want misplaced. He nodded without asking questions, and I handed it over with a simple thank you. When I returned home, the shift was immediate. My son stood near the kitchen counter with a look that pretended to be casual, but carried a tension underneath. His wife hovered near him, arms crossed, her expression stretched into a thin smile. They watched me with a focus that made the air feel heavy. She stepped forward first, her voice gentle in a way that made the words sharper. "You're overcomplicating things," she said. "Just sign the confirmation so everything can move forward." I looked at her without responding. Her eyes held the same urgency I'd heard in the hallway days earlier. My son jumped in before the silence grew. "Dad, this is getting ridiculous," he said, his voice tightening. "You always taught me family comes first, but you act like you don't trust us at all." The accusation was meant to corner me. I could feel it in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the way he waited for me to defend myself. I didn't. Trust wasn't something I owed on command, and whatever bond we once had was already cracking under the weight of what they'd done. I kept my expression neutral, giving him no doorway into my thoughts. I stepped aside to pour a glass of water, pretending my mind was elsewhere. My phone buzzed on the counter. I recognized the sender immediately. HR. The final meeting notice appeared on the screen in bold text. "Your fraud review meeting is scheduled. Attendance required." The confirmation of the time and address left no room for misunderstanding. This was the step everything had been building toward. The pressure around me sharpened as they both watched my reaction. I turned the screen face down and nodded as if it were a simple reminder. Inside, something settled with clarity. The confrontation would come, but it wouldn't happen in this kitchen, not with emotions raw and facts still in motion. It needed to be precise, grounded, undeniable. That evening, I sat alone in my room with the door closed. I rehearsed what I would say when the moment finally came. Not dramatic speeches, not accusations, just facts lined up clearly, like numbers in a ledger. I practiced keeping my tone even, removing the anger that tried to rise in my throat. I wanted my words to land cleanly, supported by the evidence they couldn't twist. The house felt like a storm building in the walls, pressure growing with every hour. But I kept my breathing steady. The final step was coming, and I needed to meet it with the same calm I was forcing into my thoughts. The time for silence was ending, but not tonight. The meeting began with a sharp click as the HR officer initiated the conference call. I sat at the dining table with my laptop, open, the screen reflecting the cool blue light across my hands. My son and his wife stood behind me at first, then slowly moved to sit on either side, as if positioning themselves for advantage. The fraud prevention officer greeted me with a steady, professional tone, and then he began laying out the facts, one by one. The first file appeared on the screen, the access logs, a clean list of timestamps, IP addresses, and device IDs. My home network number repeated through the entries, each tied to hours I hadn't been awake or near my computer. My son shifted in his seat, legs tightening, and his wife leaned forward with narrowed eyes. The officer scrolled down, highlighting the exact device that accessed the files, my old laptop, the one I rarely used anymore. I felt the tension behind me sharpen as he explained the log trail with calm precision. Next came the altered PDF. The officer enlarged the signature section so we could see the high-resolution overlay. My signed version from last year appeared first, then the forged one. The difference was obvious, even without the fingerprint analysis. One curve too smooth, one line too heavy. Then the officer displayed the fingerprint mismatch, reading, "A clear indicator the file had been tampered with." My son spoke up fast, voice rushing as if speed could erase evidence. "That has to be wrong," he said. "We never touched his files. Maybe it's reading something old, or maybe the system glitched." His words stumbled over each other. His wife jumped in next. "These platforms mix up signatures all the time," she insisted. "This could easily be a technical error. It's happened before." The officer let them talk. When they stopped, he clicked to another screen. This one showed login attempts tied directly to a user profile saved on my old laptop. My son's name appeared next to the credentials. The silence that followed was heavy enough to tighten the room. His wife opened her mouth as if to craft another excuse, but nothing came out. I finally spoke, my voice low and clear. I pointed to each part of the evidence, the logs, the signature differences, the access trail. "These aren't errors," I said. "These are choices. Someone used my equipment, my home, and my information to try and move my retirement funds. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts were louder than any anger I could have shown. My son's shoulders slumped, and he muttered the sentence that closed whatever defense he had left. "We just thought you'd agree if we pressured you enough." The words were quiet, almost defeated, but they landed with the force of a final truth. I nodded once, not in understanding, but in acknowledgement of what had finally surfaced. I thanked the HR team, confirmed I would cooperate fully with the investigation, and ended the call. Then I turned to the two people sitting at my table. My voice stayed steady, the same tone I'd practiced the night before. "You need to leave my house. Nothing more. No shouting. No long explanation." Their faces shifted from shock to something colder, but they stood and walked out without another argument. The door closed behind them, and the house fell into a silence that felt heavier than rage, heavier than grief, because it was real. The following days moved slowly, each one marked by a new message from HR or a formal notice from one of their departments. The internal fraud report was filed immediately after the call, and once that happened, everything shifted into a different category. No longer suspicion, no longer quiet warnings, but official review. The language in their emails was precise, heavy with terms I never thought would be connected to my own family. Unauthorized access, intent to redirect funds, breach of federal retirement security. I read each line carefully, letting the meaning settle before responding with whatever confirmation they needed from me. My son faced consequences faster than I expected. HR informed me that the unauthorized access to a federal retirement system required mandatory reporting. It didn't matter that he used my home network or my old laptop. It still counted as a violation, and the review team requested statements from everyone involved. His name appeared in the notice as the primary user tied to the login attempts. Seeing his name printed like that, official and unshielded, hit harder than the confrontation itself. His wife was contacted too, but on a different basis. The investigator handling the case reached out to me to confirm patterns of coercion or attempted manipulation. They asked straightforward questions about who encouraged me to sign what, who pushed the requests, who stood behind the explanations. I answered every question honestly, without coloring anything with emotion. The facts were troubling enough on their own. She had played her part just as clearly as he had. In the middle of this, I took steps to secure everything tied to my finances. I placed fraud alerts on all my accounts, changed passwords, and locked credit lines that had been open for decades. I didn't feel paranoid. I felt prepared. HR sent me a guide on elder financial exploitation protections, and a social worker called to walk me through additional safeguards I could place on future transactions. Her voice was calm, patient, and she explained the procedures without speaking down to me. When she asked if I felt safe in my home, I answered truthfully, "I do now." But safety didn't erase the weight inside me. The betrayal sat in my chest like something too heavy to shift. It wasn't anger alone. It was grief, quiet, sharp, and rooted deeper than I wanted to admit. Every time I signed a new form or secured another account, I felt another thread snapping between me and the boy I raised. I knew there was no fixing what had happened. There was only moving forward with clearer eyes. One morning, before the sun rose, fully, I replaced the locks on the front and back doors. The old keys felt strange in my hand as I dropped them into a small container for disposal. After that, I went through every legal document I owned, my will, my medical directives, my property papers, and updated each one with the lawyer who had helped me in the past. No shared authority, no joint access, no assumptions. When the last document was filed, I sat at the table in the quiet house and let the stillness settle. There was no triumph in any of it, no satisfaction, just the sober truth that justice had begun its course, and I had to live with the aftermath. Some wounds didn't bleed on the surface. They lived in the distance, between what once was and what could never be again. In the weeks that followed, the house felt different, not because it was empty, but because it was honest again. I moved through each room with a clearer understanding of how quietly financial abuse can start. It doesn't arrive with threats or loud demands. It slips in through soft voices, familiar faces, and phrases wrapped in concern. It hides behind offers to help and suggestions to make things easier. I had always believed danger would look obvious, but now I knew it often begins in places you've stopped questioning. I thought back to the small requests they made over the past year, the nudges toward convenience, the gentle pressure to combine accounts, the insistence on signing something quickly. None of it felt alarming at the time, but seen now as part of a line instead of isolated dots, the pattern was unmistakable. Pressure disguised as love, urgency dressed up as responsibility. I saw it all with a clarity that came too late to spare the hurt, but just in time to protect what mattered. I started reclaiming everything one task at a time. I met with my lawyer to reorganize my documents exactly the way I wanted them. I reviewed my investments, updated my passwords, and set new alerts that notified me of any activity within seconds. I kept track of my health appointments in a small notebook instead of depending on reminders from anyone else. These were simple steps, but each one felt like placing another stone back into the foundation under my feet. When I spoke with the HR representative one last time, she ended the call with a quiet sentence that stayed with me long after the line disconnected. "Good thing you caught this. Most don't." Her voice carried no judgment, only the steady truth of someone who had seen too many cases begin the same way and end far worse. It reminded me that what happened wasn't rare. It was common, silent, and often hidden beneath the word family. I didn't try to fill the house with noise or activity. Instead, I let the calm settle. I brewed my own coffee, sorted my own mail, planned my own days. Some evenings were quieter than others, but the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like safety, like a space where every decision belonged to me again. I didn't owe explanations to anyone. I didn't have to justify caution. I simply lived with the kind of awareness that should have been there from the start. I took walks in the early morning, the cool air giving me time to think without bitterness. I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds or offering chances to people who had shown me exactly what they were willing to do. Protecting myself wasn't harsh, it was necessary. Trust had become something earned slowly, not assumed because of blood or history. Sitting on the porch one evening, I closed the notebook where I had recorded everything. I didn't need to add more. The lesson was already carved deep, steady, and unforgettable. I thought of all the elders who might still be walking into similar traps, still believing that love and loyalty were shields strong enough to keep danger away. The truth was simpler than that. Growing old isn't the danger. Trusting the wrong people is.